Today we'll be discussing the most controversial of all the assassinations. The one marked in the most conspiracy and the most suspects of any trial at the end of the video. I will discuss a handful of them. But the only presidential assassination in which the one said to be the assassin was never actually held up to justice, but killed before it could be exacted upon him, which all just added to the conspiracy. Today we'll be discussing the mysterious assassination of President John F. Kennedy at the hands of Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was a former U.S. Marine who in 1959 defected to the Soviet Union. Now, the Kennedy administration is in the height of the Cold War, so it was increasingly concerning when any individuals did this. But he would live in Minsk, Belarus, where he would stay until 1961. He would then be repatriatized and former charges related to earlier crimes were dropped upon his return. But to be perfectly honest, this isn't like other assassins. There has never been a clear reason behind Oswald's actions. But we're going to move towards November of 1963. Now, Kennedy has brought about a change in the Democratic Party. For many years, the Democrats were, let's say, the party of the South, the party of the workers and the older class. But JFK, being a New Englander, was viewed as a moderate Democrat, or conservative Democrat, which is what made him such a likable candidate. But this caused a rift in the Democratic Party. Even his own government, his vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, could be defined as an old Southern Democrat from Texas. So he had three objectives in going to Dallas on the 22nd. Close the divide between conservative and liberal Democrats. Also start campaigning for his 1964 re-election campaign and raise money for that presidential campaign. Now, this is also where we hit an interesting point on Oswald. Much like Guiteau, who assassinated James Garfield, Oswald had actually voted for JFK and was a staunch Democrat. Possibly on the more liberal side, but a strong supporter nonetheless. But on the morning of November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy arrived at Dallas Love Field Airport, where the governor of Texas, John Connally, would be awaiting him with a small group of local officials. JFK and Jacqueline Kennedy would ride with Governor Connally and his wife. Meanwhile, behind the two couples, in the third car was Vice President Johnson and his wife. The whole cavalcade was set to go to Dallas Market Center, where he was set to speak to business and civic leaders in Dallas and the surrounding areas. Now, JFK had great concerns over Texas for his re-election, so it was strongly believed he was going to announce his re-election from Dallas and settle the Democratic Party issues in the state. But Dallas was full of cheer for the president as the car pulled into Dealey Plaza. Nellie Connally, the governor's wife, turned to the president and first lady, saying, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Kennedy smiled, responding, "No, you certainly can't." Then suddenly at 12:30 p.m., a shot rang out. President Kennedy grabbed his throat and Governor Connally grabbed his chest, falling forward. In the second car, Secret Service agent Rufus Youngblood had thrown Vice President Johnson down and was sitting on top of him to protect him. Another agent, Clint Hill, ran towards the president from the vice president's limousine. Around, people were screaming and in terror, but Hill ran as hard as he could, later stating that he had planned to throw his body over the president's to protect him. But before Hill could reach the car, a second shot rang out and hit the president directly in the back of his head, which with such force that the skull fragmented and blood shot everywhere, including the windshield of the limousine behind the president's. Jackie Kennedy, what can only be described as a shock-ridden terror, was reaching to the back of the limousine. Hill in his report said that she was trying to recover parts of her husband's skull. The third shot went off, not hitting anyone in the caravan, but allegedly hitting a tree and striking an onlooker named James Tague in his cheek. But Hill would scream at the First Lady to go back and stay down as he latched onto the back of the limousine, The car then was rushed to the Parkland Memorial Hospital. But on site immediately, police began to investigate. Several onlookers reported seeing flashes corresponding with the shots coming from the 6th floor far right window of the Texas School Book Depository. Police then descended on the building. Coming down the stairs was a scrawny-looking man. The police then stopped. But one of the foremen at the building vouched for the man, identifying him as Lee Harvey Oswald, an employee of the depository. The police then allowed Oswald to leave. But upon investigation, they found an Italian Carcano rifle with 3 spent rounds at the foot of the open window on the 6th floor. Then one of Oswald's co-workers reported seeing Oswald on the 6th floor a few moments before the shooting went off. The police then ran back to Oswald's supervisor to find him, but the supervisor reported him gone. He had left and made his way to the boarding house he was living in, got a Victory revolver, put on his jacket, and began to walk back to Dallas. Back into Dallas. A police officer named J.D. Tippit pulled up to Oswald, whom an APV was given out on. The two talked for a few moments, but when Tippit stepped out of his car around 1:15 p.m., Oswald removed his revolver and gunned the officer down. Oswald would then run off, but being followed by an onlooker, and go into the Texas Theater in Dallas. The theater was made aware of the situation and contacted the police. Police then arrived, and after Oswald attacked one of the officers, he was finally placed in custody at 7:10 p.m. He was arraigned for the murder of Tippit, then a little later for the murder of Kennedy. But back at Parkland Memorial, the president was in surgery. Governor Connally had been treated and currently recovering, but the president was still in surgery. Thousands were outside waiting, outside the hospital, awaiting anything, any news. But at around 1 p.m., Father Oscar Huber delivered the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church to President Kennedy. It's at this time the president was declared dead. President Johnson was brought back to Air Force One, the presidential plane, where he was sworn in as president with Jacqueline Kennedy by his side. Kennedy was then loaded into Air Force One, and the plane took off for Washington, D.C. Mrs. Kennedy's assistants and others insisted on her changing from the pink dress that was covered in her husband's blood. She would then say, "Let them see what they've done." The president would be laid in state, then have a funeral mass at Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle in Washington, D.C. Unlike other assassinated presidents or just presidents who passed away in general, Kennedy was not returned to his home state. Jackie was quoted as saying, "He belongs to the people." So he would be buried at Arlington National Cemetery, below the Lee and Custis House. Another connection to the Civil War, other than being near Robert E. Lee's previous home, Jackie had an eternal peace light placed at his grave, as Kennedy had loved the peace light at the town of Gettysburg. However, in Dallas, after the assassination, the police were getting concerned for Oswald's safety, so they decided to transfer him to a more secure location. So on Sunday the 24th at 11:20 a.m., the police were moving Oswald to a new facility, where he would stay until trial. Hundreds of people were lining the garage that Oswald was being escorted through, when suddenly a man jumped from the crowd, shooting Oswald in the chest. Oswald collapsed while nearby police apprehended the shooter. The man's name was Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner. Now, the death of Oswald will be the first time one of our assassins will, in a way, escape justice. I know technically Booth never stood trial, but even Stanton, the Secretary of War, would go on to say, when he acquitted Booth's shooter, Boston Corbett, that justice had been done. But this is also what now brings us into the reason this is such a controversial subject, even to this day. Now, something I left out, and for good reason, was the moment Oswald was arrested, he was brought before the press. When asked why he did it, both killing Tippit and Kennedy, his response was, "I didn't shoot anyone. They've taken me in because of the fact I lived in the Soviet Union. I am just a patsy. Now, the three shots that went off were so close together that many question if it's actually possible that Oswald could have fired all three. Which is not impossible, as we said earlier. Oswald was in the Marine Corps and was a sniper during his service. But there's also a question of the distance, the speed of the motorcade, and the placement of the hits on Kennedy. Both have been almost perfectly square in his neck and head. Again, even from where he was in the depository, it was a hard shot as it was. Next, there's the famous man on the grassy knoll. This is all based on an image from an onlooker that documented the second shot into Kennedy. Now, it's debated, but in the image it appears there is a man that smoke is coming out from around him. It would appear he had just discharged a rifle and smoke was an immediate effect of the shooting. Now, these are just a few of the theories. President Johnson would actually start something known as the Warren Commission to discover everything about the assassination. It would come up that Oswald acted alone in killing Kennedy, and Ruby acted alone killing Oswald. But Kennedy, though popular with the public, had many enemies. First, Cuban Americans. Kennedy had failed at giving air support to the Cuban exiles who were attempting to retake Cuba from Castro. This resulted in the catastrophe of the Bay of Pigs, which ended in failure. After this, it caused a strong dislike for Kennedy and the Democratic Party in the mouth of many Cubans in the United States. Another was the Mafia in the United States. Now, his father, Joseph Kennedy, was a New England millionaire. He had mysteriously made millions during the Depression Prohibition era, so it became widely believed that Kennedy's fortune was made on bootlegging and whiskey runners. But when John F. Kennedy took office, he had a hard-on-crime policy, especially against the Mafia, which some people believed was him being ungrateful and led to them setting up the assassination. Which brings in Jack Ruby, the nightclub owner. Now, he didn't need to know exactly what connection killing Oswald had with the mob, because it was believed he was a gunman for the mob. All Ruby knew, his bosses said, was to knock the guy out, and he did. Another, of course, was the Soviet Union. The belief that was while in Russia, Oswald was radicalized and told by the KGB in Kremlin to kill Kennedy. And last and most popular was Lyndon B. Johnson. Kennedy, much like Eisenhower, was not a fan of the complex that the United States government became. Again, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the United States wasn't a bureaucratic government. Like, sure, they had some, but not on the scale of the 50s to now. Kennedy had been quoted as wanting to dismember the bureaucratic state. So with Johnson leading the effort and the assistance of the intel community, they had set Oswald in the direction to kill Kennedy, and then again, encouraged Jack Ruby to kill Oswald. This one is the most popular just due to the fact that Kennedy and Johnson did not always see eye to eye. Johnson, in fact, hated being compared to Kennedy and hated his brother Robert. Like, that was a very known thing, that he hated Robert Kennedy. And Johnson was a Southern Democrat, so his policies were not similar to Kennedy in some ways. But as the Warren Commission came out, Oswald acted alone, killing Kennedy, and Ruby acted alone, killing Oswald. To this day, we will never know the truth. And when it comes to this assassination, it is, to this day, the most questioned. Thanks for watching. This was, I am more than well aware, our longest episode, but a lot surrounded it. This will be our last episode of successful attempts. Tomorrow we will be discussing the attempt of John Fleming Schrank to assassinate former President Theodore Roosevelt, who was running for re-election in 1912. Thanks for joining us as always. Please like, share, and comment. If you're new to the channel, I beg you, please join. We have new content up daily. Thank you so much for joining us again, and we'll see you in the next one.